Hello, and welcome to the POMC peptide chat video lecture. To dive into this, to clarify a little bit, what is POMC? Peptides, it's propriomelanocortin peptides. So it includes kind of two groups of peptides in here. They're three kind of like precursor molecules that end up getting broken up into a whole bunch of different molecules that become hormones and different messengers for different parts of our bodies or different chemicals that we can use. I think of importance, there's a couple of them. The first one that we're going to explore is beta endorphin. So when we're exercising, a lot of the times, sometimes we get this concept or have heard of, something called a runner's high. So with a runner's high, you get this like state of euphoria. And while the research can be a little mixed on exactly what it is and what we're experiencing, there does seem to be an increase in levels of beta endorphin. So with this molecule, what ends up happening is we get lots of pain relief, and it acts like an opioid in a sense. Pain relief, sense of euphoria-ish, elevated mood, etc. And we also experience increased endorphins in other areas outside of exercise. So extreme stress or some trauma and pain is meant to be there for like a protective mechanism. So help us protect ourselves from relief. And one of the times that we tend to experience this most, although we get it from resistance training and aerobic training, is with high intensity exercise. So if you're doing, again, like repeated sprint intervals, for example, above anaerobic threshold, that will spur on higher levels of beta endorphin. Another elevated molecule associated with this is thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, and what that does is increases T4 or thyroxine and T3, or also called triiodine threonine. So again, we've spoken about TSH and how that increases metabolic processes, in particular increasing metabolism, increasing our body temperatures and energy release to be used for exercise and etc. But we didn't say specifically what the hormones were that were released from the thyroid. So that's, again, T4 and T3. Typically when T4 gets to the receptors at the target tissues, it actually is converted into T3, even though there's more T4 typically that's in the body, floating around the body. Okay, and again, it's responsive to exercise. Of note, maybe with THS and T3, T4, is you can have hypo or hyperthyroidism as a somewhat common thing. We used to get more hypothyroid type conditions because people weren't getting enough iodine in their diet. Now, we don't need a lot of it, but we do need some like within our nutrition. And so typically in this part of the world, in North America, we put iodine in our salt. So that's not true all over the world, and depending on what sort of salts you're buying, just like, again, like table salt or whatever. Now with, say, like rock salt and different types out there, they might not necessarily be ionized, or iodinized. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that you want some supplement of iodine, because iodine is a precursor or a necessary requirement for our thyroid hormones. So that's something to keep in mind for that. Help keep that metabolism roaring along. So that's TSH. If we move forward onto something called MSH, or melanocyte stimulating hormone, Melanin is essentially skin pigmentation or pigmentation that we get. So MSH is fairly specific and narrow in its effectors and effector cells. So again, yeah, we get pigmentation of skin, hair, but it also has these interesting periphery kind of influences as well, in particular with appetite. So increased melanin or MSH, let's say, decreases our appetite. It also has impacts on other parts of our brain as far as behavior as well. So there tends to be increased memory. Generally, there's increased arousal that is associated with increased MSH, as well as fear kind of responses potentially. So, generally speaking, yeah, it's interestingly there's a drug that was developed for albinoism, people with albinoism, and British Columbia in particular has a city or a town that has a high prevalence of people with albinoism, and the reason for that is because it has the most rainy days of the year out of anywhere around this area anyway. So again, there's this drug developed for people that have this condition, and essentially what it does is it spurs on artificially the MSH or melanocytes in our bodies to produce more melanin, to produce more pigment, to help protect these people from essentially cancer, skin cancers, and yeah. Some interesting side effects of that drug was found to be weight loss, again probably through suppressed appetite, obviously getting a tan or darker skin color, increased arousal, better memory. So a lot of these things kind of seem like a very socially, culturally great things, but again, too much of a good thing can be just that. So I'm going to return. This actually was meant to be earlier after that first kind of intro slide, but to give you an idea, so here are your three precursor molecules, and here's your MSH, here's ACTH, which you know, there's beta in endorphin here. So again, from all of these, here's different types of endorphins. So from these three, POMC, type polypeptide, we get a whole bunch of very useful hormones from that. Okay. Right, so when we exercise, what we come to find is an increase in these molecules because POMC increases in its release rate. And yeah, as I mentioned, we have all the subsequent effects from TSH, beta endorphin, and MSH. Yeah, okay, good. So I'm glad I paused there. There was so kind of the last point here with thyroid hormones, so T3 and T4. So they respond to exercise, even low intensity walking, but with calorie restriction, we get a decrease in TSH. So a lot of weight management programs will encourage a very restricted calorie intake. Now, depending on what regime and tactic and who you are as an individual will dictate what sort of calorie restrictions you're seeking. But again, generally speaking, with weight management, you want to decrease calories somewhat. Now, restricting them significantly will decrease TSH. So when you hear people speak about how highly restricted caloric diets actually slows your metabolism, this is specifically how. So your TSH levels decrease under high caloric restriction. And what this is your body's attempt to preserve calories and preserve stored energy. So if we were to go through a significant period of time of lack of resources as far as food is concerned, this would be a great strategy to help ensure our bodies have enough energy. So we lower our metabolism. So we're in a very conservative kind of state. So we take minimal energy to do what we do in order to survive as far as our cellular demands and our basal metabolic rate. But again, when we're thinking more of like a weight management program, this isn't necessarily a great thing. So while you need to take in less calories than you expend, that's true in order to, say, lose weight. What we want to avoid is significant caloric restriction, which means deprived caloric intake. I would say this is just from personal experience, no specific literature behind this, but 500 calories a day, depending on who you are, but I'd say on average is quite significant, and potentially I would say a restrictive diet. So again, just something to keep in mind with that. That's a question I often get. Okay.